Good evening and welcome to the Bylaws Blueprint Series. I'm actually re-recording this because we had some audio and technical problems the first time, but I'm making sure I re-record this and send this out to all of you. Just for your reference, there is an approval for one CEU for credentialed members, and those that attended will receive that. So let's get on to the presentation. So again, welcome to our Bylaws Blueprint series. As you can tell by the flyer, we have several other workshops lined up. We appreciate you supporting our fundraiser. And if you register once, you will actually get access to the rest of the series. The next workshop is November the 16th, which is on a Sunday. And it all ends in April. That is our final presentation, which is a special parliamentary Law Month presentation. Very exciting. Thank you very much for supporting us. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to go with a quick pretest, then we're going to talk about the hierarchy of rules. We're going to talk about creating bylaws for a new organization, best practices. We're going to review the standard articles, go into the first three specifically, a quick writing lab, and some final pointers. So the learning objectives, as you can tell, reflect around the NAP body of knowledge. We're going to identify where bylaws rank in the hierarchy of rules. We're going to identify the elements needed for the name, object, and the members, the actual content of the articles. Explain why these are important for the structure and the function, and draft clear sections using sample language. All right, but first let's do a pretest, right? And for those of you that attended, you'll know that the first question we asked, what is the primary purpose of Article 1 in an organization's bylaws? The answer is B, to clearly identify the official name of the organization. Second question, why does Article 2, the object in the bylaws, what does it usually describe? And the answer was B, the main purpose and goals of the organization. The third question, which rule has the highest authority in a nonprofit organization governed by Robert's rules? And that would be the corporate charter. Then we moved on to which of the following information is commonly found in Article 3, members of the bylaws. That would be the members' rights, qualifications, and types of membership. And the final question, when writing content for bylaws, which format is recommended? I wanted to see and test your knowledge regarding the actual voice you should use. And the answer was present tense. So let's get into the meat of it. They first started talking about the hierarchy of rules, right? At the very top is the law that governs all of us on a federal, state, and local level. You may also have state nonprofit laws that may govern the activities of different associations. The second level of rules in the hierarchy is a corporate charter. This is the actual legal instrument that establishes your entity as an organization. You're probably familiar with the term articles of incorporation. That's what this really is, the corporate charter. The next level is the actual constitution and bylaws, which is the subject of this series. There was a period of time where there are two separate documents, right? One constitution that an organization would have, and then they would also have the bylaws. Now they are combined into one document. The next level are rules of order, which are the written rules of parliamentary procedure, which just helps organizations orderly transact business and meetings. It also lists the duties of officers, as well as a few other things. The purpose is to help organizations resolve conflicts that arise out of questions of procedure. The next level is the standing rules, and these are more in the form of administrative rules or standard operating procedures. If you are attending a convention, you might see standing rules, which are really the rules that govern that meeting throughout the convention. And the last one are just customs, right? These are things that organizations do that are not written, they're just customary practices of the organization, okay? But we're going to focus on bylaws, okay? Bylaws are the highest level of governing document for an organization. It prescribes how the organization functions, okay? It really contains all of the non-negotiables, such as the purpose, the structure of the board, members' rights, meeting requirements. All those tangible things are included in and necessary for your bylaws, right? It's considered a relationship between the organization and its members, right? And it must not conflict with the higher level, such as the law or the parent. If you're a subordinate unit, it cannot conflict with a national or a state level organization that you are a subordinate unit to, right? And the bylaws cannot be suspended except for clauses that provide for their own suspension. Now, this is not things that contain policy and procedure. That would be for your SOP. That would be for your standing rules, right? Those are administrative in nature. Okay. Now, imagine, if you will, you and a few other people get together and you're interested in forming a new organization. This can be a subordinate unit of a national organization, just like PBC is a subordinate unit of the National Association of Parliamentarians, or it can be an independent organization. One of the first tasks is usually to create bylaws, right, which will detail the governing structure. It could also be part of it is in creating your articles of incorporation. But the rest of the presentation, we're going to talk about the activity of creating the bylaws. That's what we're going to focus on. Okay. In general, it's probably a good idea to do some research based on your industry so you can get samples, right? Um, but some things I want us to think about. The bylaws are designed to give protection to the members, right? While whether they are present or absent, right? The bylaws need to be fair and not overly restricted or be more restrictive than the parent organization, right? Just allows the organization to have flexibility and continuity, right? But it should also allow members to make some changes whenever necessary, right? All right. But first, when you are a new organization, a new society, according to Robert's rules, you need to do a few things first. Okay. The organizers need to get together. They can either do it by calling a mass meeting, or you select a few people into a smaller, intimate meeting. Um, but you actually need to accomplish a couple of things. First of all, you must have elect a chair pro tem. You have to elect a secretary pro tem, right? So you need to have some structure to these meetings because certain things must actually have to happen, right? It doesn't necessarily create the legal framework for the organization, but it starts putting the building blocks in place, okay? Um, Other things in this meeting, right? You'll actually appoint a committee to draft the bylaws, and then you'll start planning for the second meeting, right? Which has a couple of other activities that needs to happen. But we're going to focus on the first organizational meeting. This would actually be like a sample agenda. You call the meeting to order. You elect the chair pro tem. You elect a secretary pro tem. Then you'll probably have some sort of resolution. And that resolution, which really is a motion, just actually puts the framework, right, and the format of the organization, right? It talks about how the organization is going to be formed. That's why you're all there. That's the purpose of your being there. Then they may have some other motions, such as creating a bylaws committee to draft the bylaws. Then you'll actually put together an adjourn meeting to fix the next date and time for the second organizational meeting. And at the second meeting, you will do a couple of other specific things that we won't necessarily go into great detail. but it's at this meeting um, that the bylaws committee will bring forth a report, and there may be some other business as well. Okay. And in the live presentation, we did go through a script, but because this is a recording, I won't go through that. So I will just scan through this. But the purpose was so that you could actually hear in real time what that first organizational meeting sounded like. But let's move on to some best practices, right? So in terms of the format, RONR suggests some very specific things, that the articles contain Roman numerals, the sections, Arabic numbers and numerals, and when it comes to titles, that they be capitalized in the heading, in the other sentences in the titles in lowercase, and the spacing be double spaced. Okay, this just gives it a nice clean look. Okay, for those of you that are more visual, if you're really into grammar and formatting and editing, you'll appreciate this sample style sheet. This gives you a visual of how, more like a template of how you'll set up your sample bylaws, at least the first three articles, which we're talking about today. You can either have it in either one of these formats. The top half talks about how the sections for members, for example, is A, regular members, B, affiliate members, or C, honorary members, or you can use the format in the second part of it at the bottom, which is 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Either one of these are appropriate, and you may have seen them in different formats in other organizations, and that may be preferable to you. But either way, this is how you will set up your sample bylaws. All right, now let's talk about some structure, right? The actual content, right? Some questions to keep in mind as you begin writing it. Is the scope too broad? Is it too narrow? It might be a good idea to seek some feedback from some other people that are in the meeting so they know, and you'll have an idea if you're on the right track. But basically, when you organize the articles, it really should be logical, right? And they should flow and be in harmony with one another, right? In terms of the language, using clear, exact, and concise language is very important, as well as the punctuation. When you get to um, a period where you want to talk about the duties in the bylaws, when you use shall or must, it's used to impose a duty or act, right? If you use should or may, that's when you want to indicate discretion. So you need to be very clear, especially when it comes to officers and duties and things like that. Are you going to impose a duty, meaning this is what has to happen? Or you're going to say, it's a little optional, right? So you need to be just very, very clear. In terms of acronyms, if the organization is going to be more commonly known by the acronym, then you should include that. For example, the parliamentarians of Bucks County would be hereinafter referred to as PBC. So that's how you would spell out the actual acronym if you want that to be known for that. You also should use the present tense third person singular in the way you craft your language. For example, don't say the treasurer shall be the budget chair, but rather say the budget chair is the treasurer. That is what third person singular sounds like. You want to make sure you avoid negative statements. Just like we don't have negative motions, we don't put negative statements in our bylaws. Okay? One of the things that is not on here, but in terms of structure, right, is consistency. Very important. Once a term is used in one place, you use the same term throughout. So, for example, if you are talking about your leadership as the board of directors in one place, In another place, don't change up and now all of a sudden calling them the executive board. You really want to be consistent with your terms. Okay. Now, let's talk about all of the standard articles. They are listed here according to Roberts. These are the minimum articles that you should have. There are certainly others that you can have depending on your organization and what you choose to do. For example, if you want a dissolution clause, that's fine. If you want a conflict of interest article, that's fine too. Or a disciplinary procedure, that's fine too. But these are the bare minimum. We're going to focus on the top three, okay? Um, and in terms of helping you remember, this is a mnemonic device. And the way those of us that study Robert's rules, we say nomane CPA. It just helps remember all of the articles in that specific format, right? It's just a way of remembering the structure of bylaws, just as guidance for anybody. All right, so let's get into specifically, okay? Again, you might want to reference your state nonprofit laws because they may actually have some details about what organizations should have, especially in this first article, right? They may say you may have to put in your actual address, or if you have a registered agent, you may have to include that. So please reference those specific laws. But this article will contain the official legal name of your organization. We already talked about an acronym. This is where you would include that as well. Be mindful of any legal issues, right? Any trademark infringement you want to steer away from, and any other type of regulations you need to be aware of uh, in terms of a specific name, right? You don't want to do some research and find out somebody else has your name already. So you want to be careful about that, right? The name should stand out among the competitors and it reflects your mission and your values. Now, if you actually have a separate corporate charter or a constitution and the name is in those documents, you do not have to include it here. You do not even have to have this article if that information is already in your corporate charter or your constitution. Okay, you can actually omit this article. One of the things we looked at in the live broadcast is this sample, right? Keep in mind, you are now part of the bylaws committee. You're welcome. And in your role, I want you to look at the sample and think about what should we redo the sample or is it already done well enough? In the live broadcast, let me tell you what was brought up. One of the things that kind of stuck out to everyone is they suggested we get rid of this whole first sentence at bare minimum, right? Get rid of the phone number, okay? Get rid of this part where it talks about the purpose, right? Not really appropriate here, okay? The articles of incorporation are pending. That's not really appropriate. So it might just boil down to this very last sentence of the principal name of the organization shall be the Youth for Bucks County, also known as YBC. And that's fine if it comes down to the one sentence, because less is more. You need to be careful about being too overly wordy in your bylaws anyway. So by eliminating all of this but the last sentence, that would probably do you just fine and be perfect. Let's move on. Article 2 is the object. This is where the purpose that we took out of that first article that shouldn't have been there goes right here in article number 2. It defines the purpose, the vision, and the mission. And again, you can omit this if you have a preamble, which would go before everything. The preamble is before the name in the article 1. which sometimes is very detailed about the vision and the mission and the purpose of the organization. If you have one of those, you do not need an object. But if you don't, that is where you would put this information in. Okay? Keep it simple. A real simple sentence is fine. You do not have to be overly prescriptive about it. But it really does elaborate on the activity that the organization undertakes. What is the primary activity that the organization is going to be doing? Now, the reason why this is so important is in your meetings, if you or anyone else decides to introduce an agenda item outside of this object, outside of your purpose, outside of your mission, it would require a 2/3 vote. Okay? And this should be consistent with the principles of the organization as well. Let's look at this sample bylaw article. Okay? If you were part of the bylaws committee, which you are, what would you do differently, right? Would you keep it or would you not keep it, right? And the feedback here, number one, was that you should capitalize the word object, okay? And probably cut it down to the organization shall promote the concepts of leadership, compassion, and community service. Like even, synthesize it even more, right? You can even cut out some of this wordy stuff in the beginning. But those were the suggestions, and they were spot on. I agree. Let's move on to the third article, okay? This is where we talk about the members, right? This is where you would outline the distinction between the members, the rights and privileges of each member. Are there any limitations on how many members you can have? Whether or not you'll be life members or honorary members. It just really talks about the classes of membership. You need to be very detailed about that. Okay. You also talk about the qualifications for membership. Can anybody join? Is there specific educational levels or credentials or criteria that you will need to overcome or to achieve in order to be a member of this organization, right? You need to detail how the protocol of how membership can be lost and reinstated. That would mean resignations, suspensions, terminations, all of that should be detailed, right? Also, are there any obligations, like how many times people have to attend meetings, right? Any continuing education requirements? Now let's talk quickly about dues. You can include dues here. You wouldn't include a specific dollar amount, but the fact that dues must be paid by members, okay? How often, the frequency, and what happens if they do not pay the dues, right? Membership rules must be clear and in full compliance with the law. Again, it cannot conflict with the higher governing documents, especially if you are a subordinate unit and you have a parent unit or a national unit or an international unit. You cannot conflict with those higher governing documents. A word about assessment. If you want your organization to have the authority to charge assessments, you would also put it here, especially if it's in addition to dues. You would include that authority in this article. Let's look at this other example. Should we redo it or is it already done? The feedback in the live presentation indicated that there was some really vague language. First and foremost, you talk about youth leaders here. We didn't talk about that in the purpose and in the object. We just said youth. So that was one suggestion. And how do you measure good character? What is that? How do you measure high academic achievement principles? Sounds good and sounds like we should have them, but what are they exactly? Okay. And also, this dollar amount should not be here. So we want to say members must pay their dues to be active members. It's a good idea to keep a date, but not the dollar amount. Okay. And one last comment about inactive members. That goes back to there was a suggestion to get rid of that and instead just talk about what it takes to be an active member, not what an inactive member is. And that, that could go either way, but I certainly appreciate the suggestion. And the last activity was our writing lab. So in this little exercise, what we were looking for is based on the language that we have here and based on the sample, we're looking for a suggestion of how to write this particular bylaw article if we want to tell the members that they have to pay a flat fee of dues every year and that the dues will include their state and their national dues from the higher organization, right? And that if the state and national dues go up, the overall dues will go up. So we want all of that in our sample bylaw article. And what we came up with was something that sounded like annual dues for members are to be paid by October 31st of each year, and inclusive of the state and national dues as well. So just that language is very simple, very clear, and making sure that when members read this, because it has to be fair, right? And it has to be understandable. So if they were to read that statement I just said, they'll know that as a member, you got to pay dues every year, and that whatever your membership dues are, it's going to include the national and state amount. And someone also suggested that maybe also writing in something that if the national dues go up or if the state dues go up, the overall dues will go up. That's kind of optional, but I certainly appreciate the suggestion. But it's a great idea to look at your language carefully and to make sure that it's understandable but concise. It doesn't have to be overly wordy because we want to keep explaining. Okay. I hope that I drove that point home. So let's kind of sum this up with some final pointers. Everything doesn't have to be in the bylaws, right? We're talking about putting in extra things to explain. If you work on being very succinct, being very clear, I think that'll help you accomplish your mission so that everyone, so that they know what the message is coming across. Okay. The second pointer is make sure your articles are in a proper sequence and that they're arranged logically. So, for example, if you talk about dues in the member section, if you're in the finance section, you shouldn't repeat the same information talking about dues, right? Keep it all together and it'll flow logically. Okay. Keep the future in mind. You don't want to tie the hands of your members and your board in your bylaws. So you want to be future focused, right, in terms of the language and allow room for improvement. And the last thing is good spelling, punctuation, and grammar goes a long way. So I wanted to make sure I bring forth some of those final points. But I want to thank you for this. I appreciate you all sitting for our presentation. I apologize I didn't get the full recording. We had such great questions, great feedback, great interaction. I thank you all, but I really did want to re-record this so you can have the nuts and the bolts and the slides to know what we talked about today. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.